Hello BookTube, this is Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I'm here with the second Tome Around book tag. I was tagged by Noah at Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse, and I believe the original tag is from Juliet the Hungry Bookworm, so I'll share both of those links below. This is a tag about used books, and I love used books. So I'll just jump right in with the first question. Do you buy books secondhand? Yeah. Uh, almost, probably about 85% of what you see on these shelves is a used book from one store or another. I frequent a number of used bookstores here in Phoenix. There's a local Arizona chain, Bookman's, that has 2 in Phoenix, 3 in Tucson, 1 in Flagstaff, and they do a lot of used books. There's a couple of half-price books, which is sort of more of a national chain. There's a number of half-price books here in the Phoenix area. I think there's 3, and so I'll stop by those. Both of those places have little teacher card discounts I use to get it, an extra 10 or 20% off, which is always nice. There's a number of smaller independent places, Changing Hands Bookstore, which has both new and used books, and usually is attached to a cafe of some type. They're big. My wife is a big fan of theirs. There's a place called the Book Gallery, which has these great, sort of rare first editions. I mean, really, sometimes very classy and expensive books that I don't purchase, but they have a lot of great used books, very well curated. There's a small place that's just called Books over by some of the Phoenix Mountains, and so if I'm hiking, I'll go maybe stop in there and find something, and then. So yeah, there's a lot of used bookstores here in Phoenix, and I love to go to all of them. I think one of the things I really like about secondhand books, used books, is the idea that there was a time, sort of in the 150 years after the printing press, where books became much more common. They weren't the property of monasteries and the extraordinarily affluent. They could be purchased by, more middle-class people, and even, I don't want to say regular people, because there were still huge numbers of peasants, but there were more and more people who were becoming literate, who through some type of industry or trade became literate, and so books through the printing press and that combination of technology became a lot more common. And there was the idea of the lending library, and sort of the concept of, you're going to sort of receive a book from a lending library and you'll read it, and you're probably never going to see that book again, so you have a responsibility to yourself, to those around you. Write down everything that's in it that's really important, take lots of notes, and then if you write letters, you have a responsibility to be quoting from that book. You've read something that most of your neighbors and your, those you converse with, whether in person or in letters, have not read. You have a responsibility to share the ideas that are in that book with them. And that's why we get such monstrosities as The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton, where he's just quoting nonstop from everyone, and he's not showing off. He just really feels like part of his job as a writer is to share everything he's ever read with you, because he doesn't know if you're going to get a chance to read it. And sometimes that's the way I feel about books. I with my wife and I will talk, or with friends I have, and we just want to talk about the books we're reading. And when I purchase used books, I get that sense of feeling of okay, this is a set of ideas that not only I'm sharing with the writer, but that somebody else who I'm probably never going to meet, I get to share it with that unknown person. And there's just sort of this diaspora of really cool ideas, and sometimes terrifying ideas or poor writing, but often very cool ideas, very challenging ideas, different perspectives coalescing, and I love that sense of sort of being a ripple in the current of human thought and time. I just love that. As an example, periodically you find used books that someone's written in. So for example, in my copy of the Portable Russian Reader, which is one of the Viking portables, very faintly you can see here someone wrote the Portable Russian Reader and wrote the worst anthology on the back page. Very poor selections, a very poor anthology. Just writing it very faintly in pencil there. And I thought about erasing it, and I was like, it's almost comical that someone was that disappointed with this book, and I rather enjoyed it. So, yes, I buy frequently secondhand. Most of my library is secondhand books. Um, any books I've recently purchased? Well, so one of the things I love the Viking portables, especially the poets of the English language. So these are the medieval and Renaissance poets. I got this from a Half Price Books, and just absolutely fantastic. I saw this on Jason at Byways and Bookland's Top 10 Nonfiction tag, and then I stumbled into Changing Hands, I think 2 days later, and found a copy of Diarmaid McCulloch's Christianity, the First 3,000 Years, which I very much look forward to reading. There's a used music store in Arizona, Zia Record Exchange, that sometimes sells books, used books, and I just walked in and found the entire Palliser series by Anthony Trollope. And what's really amazing, I mean, they're fantastic, but they also have all these fun little line drawings in them. No real notes of any sort, but just really fun line drawings. And it was almost obscene. They were like $1.50 each. So I picked up the entire series, just kind of took them off the shelf and trundled them under my arm. And then the last one that was a recent haul is Everybody's Pepys, the abridged version of the Samuel Pepys diary. And this is actually a copy from 1926. So this book is older than any of my grandparents were by 1 year. But just a lovely book. I've been reading, each night I'll read about a month worth of the entries in his abridged diary. And they had a, complete hardcover series that was far out of my range. But I grabbed that one and it was a delight. So those are some recently purchased used books I have. I've probably purchased at least over a dozen more. The Uncertain Glory by Juan Sales, which I put a review of last week, was, that's a used book. Many of my books are used books. So the condition I purchase used books in, and the answer is any. I really don't care about the condition. I care more about the contents of it, and so I try to rescue books sometimes. So, for example, this was a Viking portable, poets Elizabethan and Jacobi. You can see all along here it was actually torn. The spine was pretty battered. So Scotch tape fixed that, and then I do a little Scotch tape on the inside as well to kind of reinforce it down along here as well. And I've had this copy for about 5-6 years, and it's held up quite well, just with some Scotch tape. Same with my romantic reader. This was a little more battered, and then my older daughter, when she was about 1, got a hold of it and decided she wanted to read it too, and then loved it so much that I had to reinforce it even more. And plus, it's just a great, exciting cover, even though the romantics didn't really dress that way, but glorious. Sometimes you find books that especially in hardcovers, where the spine is like basically fallen apart and is torn off. And so this was an example of that. This is the Modern Library Medieval Epics. And so on this page in here, it had torn and the entire hardcover had cracked off. So what I did is I took a chisel and scraped off all the old glue, and then used wood glue and just weighted it down and secured it, and it's held up extraordinarily well. And so I'll do that with books. I sometimes even have to do that with children's books like One Fish, Two Fish, where my daughters loved it so much and read it so much that it had completely torn and detached. And so again, scrape and then wood glue, weight it, good as new. So the condition of the used books, again, I don't care. I want what's in the book, not the physical copy itself. I do like to read books. I find that holding those and the light can bother my eyes if I try to read articles online. So I do enjoy really reading used books. So then question 4, do you keep or donate? So I keep a huge number of books, in part because I like to reread books. When I'm reading a book, it stimulates me to read something else, and I want to go look up a passage from that or find some other idea that I want to connect it to. The other part is that my wife and I share a number of the books. We read books together at least once a year. Sometimes, some years we get like 3 or 4 books together. And I'm hoping, my daughters are 3 and well, 1.5. She'll be 2 next week. 3.5 and 1.5. But I'm hoping that as they get older and want to read, they'll snag books and we'll read them together. And I often just read out loud whatever I'm reading to them, in addition to reading children's books, and they seem to like that. So I do keep a lot of these. Now I work at an alternative high school, and most of the time I've taught, it's been in Title I schools, which, if you're not from the United States, those are schools where the about 2/3 to 3/4 of the students would qualify for free and reduced lunch. And so a lot of the schools I work at are in communities or with populations that don't have a huge amount of extra money. And so sometimes there's no school library. The school I work at doesn't have a school library. And so what I do is I have sort of the Mr. Vermeer, personal library. And I set that up in my classroom in some cabinets or on a bookshelf. And I'll just grab some nonfiction, some mysteries, poetry, general fiction, history. I have second copies of a couple of the Viking portables, and I just put it all in there. And if kids want to borrow it, they just let me know. I write it down. They can borrow it for sometimes months, sometimes it's 3 days, sometimes it's for a class period, and just try to stimulate their opportunity to read. And so I'll rotate books in and out of there. If there's a book I've read that I don't think I'm going to reread again soon, I'll take that to school and put that in there. And that's kind of how I cycle through a number of books. Question 5 is, do I have a favorite online used place? I don't. I saw in Noah's video, he's talking about his eBay watch list. And it made me think of the fact that when I was younger, before I had a smartphone, so up until 2015, I would have note cards or post-it notes or the back of a receipt on which I would list the books I wanted to look for. And that has now morphed into a note on my phone, and I just will periodically find things and I just delete the entry, or decide, you know what, I don't actually need this, and delete the entry. I sometimes will buy used copies of books that are going to be discarded from public or school libraries. Most of the Library of America volumes I have on this shelf, and then the one that's right above it that's hard to see, most of those actually come from discarded library copies, and so I'll buy those online. But that's about it. I kind of enjoy the treasure hunt of digging through used bookstore shelves. It's exciting. Question 6, hardback or paperback? I don't care. Paperbacks are usually lighter, which is nice. Hardbacks can last longer, which is fantastic, and I'll take the trade-off, So I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. Most of these books you can see are paperbacks, but there's quite a few hardback books I have too. Question 7, gems, and this is where I don't want to take too much time, but also want to brag. So if you've followed Steve Donahue's Penguin Tour, he was talking about Ovid, and one of the books he didn't have in his library, and I did send him a picture, is Ovid's erotic poems, which includes the Amores and Ars Amatoria, and then Cures for Love and On Facial Treatment for Ladies. The Amores is my favorite work of Ovid's, and this was a used book I found. I absolutely adore it. A series I really enjoyed in my 20s and return to periodically are the vintage contemporaries. And so they had these classic white spines with the block of color, and these are some of the very first ones released. So Bright Lights Big City by J. McInerney. Of course, it has the World Trade Centers. This was published in the 80s. The Bushwhacked Piano by Thomas McGuane with the car leaping off. And then Dancing in the Dark, just a very challenging book for anybody who's in a marriage, by Janet Hobhouse. And it's a really intensive picture there. But I love the vintage contemporaries. And an example of an old used library copy, so that was from the Prescott College Library in northern Arizona. But these are the poems of Francois Villon, very slim volume. Some of them were translated by Algernon Swinburne or Dante Gabriel Rossetti. A couple of paperbacks, things that sometimes you can't even find them online. Bloodstone from the Kane series by Carl Edward Wagner. This is one of my all-time favorites. This is my third copy of this because every time I lend it to someone, it just disappears because it's that good. But the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, Volume 2A, which is a bunch of novellas. Who Goes There by John W. Campbell Jr., Vintage Season by Henry Kuttner and C.L. Moore, The Baby is Three by Theodore Sturgeon, H.G. Wells' Time Machine with Folded Hands by Jack Williamson. I mean, just an absolute crackerjack of books. If you like Sherlock Holmes, The Return of Moriarty by John Gardner, who was, I think, more famous for his James Bond novels after Ian Fleming, but I really like the Moriarty novels. Speaking of James Bond, the first post-Ian Fleming, Colonel Sun, which is written by Robert Markham, but that's actually Kingsley Amis writing James Bond, and it's weird but fantastic. And again, this is like just, I spent years with this on my list and finally stumbled on it one day as a little paperback. And then another great bizarro sort of post-Vietnam mystery, Tapping the Source by Kem Nunn, which is actually the inspiration for the film Point Break. The idea that there are surfers who are criminals is about the only thing they have in common, but a really weird, strange mystery novel. And then this was one I got over the summer. It's Thomas Malory's complete works, including the Morte d'Arthur, but it's the original edition from the 1460s, contemporaneous with the Wars of the Roses, the prose, and so it's got all the really fun, exciting spelling that I absolutely love. And then this is sort of like the mother of all gems that I found in a used bookstore. I had heard about this book when I was reading Tristram Shandy, and then I saw a copy one time in a bookstore, and it was over $100. And then I saw a copy, and it was like $89. And I was like, man, am I ever going to find a copy? And then one day, I walked upon The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton. And it's, when you add it all up, it runs, I think, over 1,200 pages. It's close to 1,500 pages. And this is the one where I said, he's just quoting non-stop. Every epigram that's clever that Seneca wrote is in this book. And that's good. It's a good thing. Burton is sharing all these really cool things he came across, and he just weaves it all up into this idea around commenting on the human condition in the most bizarre way possible. And so I'm really happy that I found a copy of it, and it makes me laugh every time I read it, and also makes me roll my eyes all the way to the back of my head, but then turn right back to the next page and continue on. And so when I found that, I was just so excited. I just kind of grabbed it, and I mean, it's an absolute. It looks like a defense device or something. It's so big, and the spine was even preserved. It was fantastic. So those are a couple of the gems I have. In terms of books to donate, as I read these, they cycle into my school library. I share with friends and family, and that's kind of the route I take in terms of donating books. And I love used books. I think I love them more than new books. And again, it's just because of that connection. Some of these books are books that belong to my grandfathers or my grandmothers, and so I enjoy having those. And I don't know who many of the others belong to, but they were people who thought these were worth taking a look at, and I agree with them. And that gives us something in common as people. So I'll end this marathon of a set of responses there. I have too many more gems I would love to show, but I'll end with Anatomy of Melancholy, which is a very funny look at melancholy. In terms of tagging people, I guess I would be curious, Brian at Book Hunting, what used bookstores are in Milwaukee? Noah's Tag let me know all about Atlanta and all the places to hit. So I guess I'm interested in Milwaukee or Wisconsin if Brian wants to do this one day. So I'll leave you there. Thank you, BookTube.